Hello, I thought that I would make another MLA formatting and Chicago Manual of Style video. And this time I will also mention Audre Lorde and encourage you to watch the Schoenberg Literary Festival read aloud that I give you the link to. And the link is in the interactive Google Doc day 6, week 6, October 6th. That's coming up. So, again, it's hosted by the Schoenberg Center Literary Festival, and Audre Lorde's work is read aloud by such literary greats, contemporary living authors as Roxane Gay and Tracy K. Smith, two of my favorites. So it's kind of a powerhouse reading, highly recommended. And now, grammar. So just 2 or 3 ideas that might be useful for you in your writing, and sort of responding to some of your questions, but also just three basic things that you might make a use of. Some of this might be very obvious. Maybe you've never learned this. Maybe you've learned it 12 times. I just like to cover the bases. So, quotations and dialogue. I wrote in some of my comments to a handful of you for the institutional critique essays that suggesting that you paraphrase rather than excerpt a long quote. There's nothing wrong with long quotes, but if you do, I recommend, and so does the Chicago Manual of Style, that you indent a block quote so that the whole quote is indented. And that, there's a general rule of thumb. If it's longer than 3 lines, indent as a block quote. If it's less than 3 lines, contain it within the paragraph. There are exceptions, as always, to every rule, but that's generally something to keep in mind. If it's a long quote, indent. But in terms of paraphrasing, if the long quote is serving a purpose, such as taking the reader on a lyrical ride or illustrating something that you don't think you can articulate in your own personal writing voice, only the author that you're quoting could, or if it's a very important series of statistics or something like that where you need the whole quote, great. But if you can find a portion of the quote that you can excerpt and then rephrase the rest of it in your own words, then you can cite your paraphrase. So basically, let's say you have a paragraph from a book that you want to quote, I would suggest that you only pick one sentence and then paraphrase the rest of the paragraph and then quote the whole thing. So you can usually put the citation at the end of your paraphrase or at the end of the quote, making it clear to your reader that you are referring to someone else's work. So if you say something along the lines of, I'll just use one of the authors I just mentioned, Tracy K. Smith, and maybe you are wanting to excerpt a very short passage of one of her poems, then maybe you would say, in her poem, I forget some of the titles of her poems. In her poem, Plums for Breakfast, that's not a Tracy K. Smith poem. In her poem, Plums for Breakfast, Tracy K. Smith touches upon themes of loneliness and hunger. Again, making this up, don't quote me on that, but let's pretend I'm paraphrasing the poem, and then you might want at the end of that paraphrase to include the quote, and then you would put the citation at the end of all of that. So you don't need to give 2 citations for your paraphrase and the quote. It would just be one citation for your summary and the quote. But notice that when I gave you that example, I gave the reader the author. So I wouldn't say, as Frances Cannon, the author, here's my ideas of loneliness and hunger, and then just throw Tracy's quote in there. It really helps to set up all quotes and to describe, if you're paraphrasing something, so as not to plagiarize, describe the source and say, this author describes this in this book. So I would say giving your reader the direct source and then paraphrasing and then smaller quotes. That's my suggestion. There's always circumstances that would be exceptions to the rule. Just my suggestion for shorter excerpts.